Fast and the Furious is a 2001 film directed by Rob Cohen that launched one of the biggest media franchises of the 21st century. The plot can be described as Point Break, but with street racers. In order to investigate some thefts that have been going on, wet behind the ears police officer Brian O'Connor goes undercover in LA's street racing scene. He gets too deep into his cover, dazzled by star racer Dominic Toretto. He falls for Dom's sister Mia, fights with his superiors, and questions where his loyalties lie as it becomes apparent that Dom may be behind the thefts. While this franchise has a mixed reputation even among fans, I do think the first movie is a pretty solid action thriller. The plot's easy to follow, the stunts are exciting, and there's enough emotional drama to keep you interested. But is this high-octane, hyper-masculine American action flick also kinda gay? This movie came out almost 20 years ago, but if you haven't seen it yet, there are probably spoilers in this video. Well, The Fast and Furious would be nothing without absolutely sick cars. What really drives the film is Brian's internal conflict. He's supposed to be gathering information from any street racer who might know about the thefts, but he ends up falling in love with Mia, and with the racing world in general. As a result, the main psychological drama of the film consists of Brian and Dominic growing to trust each other despite their better judgment. The cops are convinced that Dominic has been leading the bandits, but Brian just doesn't want to believe it. He breaks into a couple garages and authorizes a raid on Johnny Tran's crew, bad choice dude, and attempts to do his job and befriend Dom at the same time. And Dom ushers Brian pretty quickly into his inner circle, despite Vince's completely justified suspicions that this new guy has ulterior motives.
He mows like a cop.
Brian and Dom are both introduced right at the beginning of the movie. While flirting with Mia about the world's crappiest tuna sandwich, Brian checks out this mysterious hunk at the back of the store. The crew rolls up, with Letty dressed to kill, and Vince, roid raging and insecure about his sexuality, starts a brawl with Brian for daring to talk to Mia. With some prompting from Mia and Letty, Dom breaks up the fight in the most macho way possible. He also calls Brian a serial killer, tells him to buzz off, and threatens his job. Romantic, right? But Brian has some job security, and he's already too interested in Dom not to show up again. The next time they meet, it's on totally different terms. Brian doesn't have the money to enter the big race, so he bets his car instead. All he wants is respect. Dom is impressed by this display of guts, and is more than a little curious about his tricked-out Mitsubishi Eclipse, so he agrees to let Brian into the race. Now, keep in mind here that Brian doesn't need to race Dom right away as part of his cover. The fact that his bosses didn't give him the money for the race means he's probably not supposed to draw this much attention to himself. He can gather intel just as easily from the sidelines, and it's probably easier than trying to get with the most popular boy in school. But Brian has already decided that his main priority is to win over Dom. In fact, that's why anything happens in this movie. Brian's just trying to impress the cool guy. Brian loses to Dom, and his car all but falls apart in the race. When he finally stops, though, he looks more like a man who just saw God than someone who's about to lose an $80,000 vehicle. Dom walks over to claim his prize and inspect the damage, but their conversation is totally different than when they first met. He roasts Brian for everyone to hear, but he does it really playfully and even gives him some driving tips. And Brian just can't help but grin like a kid in a candy store through this entire exchange. You don't need to understand the technical speech to see that Brian's overexcitement has already brought them closer together. Dom's a little more reserved, but after Brian helps him escape the police, it becomes pretty clear that he likes this new guy. And once they make it to the house party, Dom announces to everyone that Brian has now won his trust. By the time Brian brings around a diamond-in-the-rough Supra to replace the Eclipse, which gets blown up by the way, they're basically flirting with each other through car talk. As the scene ends, Mia tells Brian that
he owns you now.
We also hear Jerul's song Life Ain't a Game playing, which samples Strangelove by Depeche Mode, and but for real, what's important about this line is that even though she and Brian are falling for each other, Mia can still tell that Brian is also being drawn in by Dom's magnetism. She mentions it again when she and Brian are out on a date.
Everything just gets pulled to him. Even you.
On this date, Mia opens up about how she's always living in her brother's shadow, and so she's really glad to come first for once. She's finally found this cute guy who's not an idiot, and he was into her before he even met her brother. Honestly, she's the most hurt by all the lying in the movie. She basically has to give her brother up to the cops after the job that she warned him about goes awry just to try and save his hide. And it turns out that her boyfriend was lying to her about why they even knew each other in the first place. She really was just living in Dom's shadow the entire time. But speaking of Dom, we can't forget the iconic Charger scene. There's some brief flirting, car talk, and then Dom starts to open up about his past. It's a really vulnerable scene, and as Dom quietly pours his heart out, we can see just how deeply he started to trust Brian. Their connection is now deeper than just cars or work or debts. It's a bond. And isn't opening up about your childhood trauma the real third base? This new level of intimacy pulls Brian even further from his job, and at the diner he can't keep his cool about all these secrets. He asks Dom directly for a part in the crew's side gig, and Dom lets on that if Brian proves himself to be a good driver at race wars, he'll be in. I love this look on Brian's face after he hears that. Like, is he frustrated that Dom doesn't completely trust him yet? Or is he more upset that it really was Toretto doing the thefts this whole time? Also, the stoplight challenge where they're cruising Pacific Coast Highway, where Dom is basically playing the role of like the eye candy girl in the Ferrari. When Brian does blow his cover once and for all, Dom is livid at the betrayal of trust. He holds back in the moment because he's got to take care of his crew. But back in LA, we see Dom's true feelings.
You are the cop!
You know what's funny is that Brian actually yells more than Dom does in this scene because he's freaking out about seeing everyone in danger and is realizing that he can't go on having a foot in both worlds. Dom is clearly hurt at being lied to, but in the end, he knows where his priorities are.
Now, I gotta find Jesse before they do.
And this takes us to their final race.
I used to drag here back in high school.
Notice how it's carried almost entirely by meaningful looks. I believe this is what you call searching someone's face for answers. When Brian hands Dom the keys to its car, it's clear to us that he's finally admitted that his feelings for Dom are stronger than whatever duty he felt towards the police. And as for Dom,
I know what you're doing.
I owe you a 10-second car.
now, I don't think Vin Diesel and Paul Walker are intentionally playing a romance in this movie.
At least I was playing romance.
It's just that the film is so full of testosterone and emotional tension that it ended up with some pretty strong subtext. Honestly, I think if anyone's supposed to be gay in this movie, it would be Vince. In his book, The Celluloid Closet, Vito Russo talks about how the makers of buddy cop bro movies in the second half of the 20th century were afraid that the closeness between their male leads could feel a little bit too subversive. So they came up with some strategies to quell the potential anxieties of their straight men viewers. The easiest one to recognize is when there's a scene or two with some women in the movie and it's really just there to give us a no homo moment but nothing else. But Russell also points out another way filmmakers reaffirm their characters, or their viewers, heterosexuality, by adding a character coded as gay or trans to act as a foil to the quote-unquote real men leading the movie. In comparison, the leads will look more traditionally masculine and supposedly straight. In the context of the Fast and the Furious, Vince can pretty easily take on this role of scapegoat. It might seem at odds with him also being the only openly homophobic character in the movie, but the whole homophobes are actually just repressed gay guys shtick was already pretty popular back in the early 2000s. How else can you explain this double tank top mesh action? Looks like he's dressed up to go turn up in WeHo, mask for mask. But seriously, you can make a pretty strong case that his aggressiveness towards Brian comes from a not-so-healthy dose of internalized homophobia. His unnecessary defensiveness over Mia just reeks of a guy overcompensating for something. Makes me think he's more interested in the idea of dating Mia and the social status it entails, rather than Mia herself. After all, he totally ignores her when she tells him not to get into a fight, whereas Brian, who's more secure in his masculinity, tries to cut his losses and leave quietly. Jesse and Leon just kind of joke about the rising tension in this sandwich scene, like they've seen it before and they don't take Vince's hypermasculine posturing very seriously. Vince even calls Brian the word you shouldn't call gay people, and then proceeds to get very intimate with him. This happens again when the crew has dinner together. Vince mocks Brian for helping Mia with the dishes, and has some comment about a dress that definitely makes him look like an asshole, and also definitely makes him look like he's insecure about something. Mia shuts him down by asking Brian out, and this time Vince is too drunk to start a fight. Once again, though, in this scene, he's trying so hard to be macho and straight that he's like performing this parody of manhood that none of his friends even take seriously. In contrast, Brian is more secure in his identity, so he isn't scared of doing quote-unquote women's work or of letting Mia make the first move. And it's clear from the dinner that this takes place after that what's really bothering Vince is how much time Dom spends with Brian. Now, I won't ask how Vince knows that Brian moans like a cop. But I don't think it's much of a stretch to guess that he's so aggro because he's insecure and feels threatened by this confident pretty boy stealing his man. At the end of the day, The Fast and the Furious, like most American action flicks, is a movie where male bonding is the biggest emotional pull. Or the second biggest if we're going to count cool car, go fast as an emotion. Two guys with cool, fast cars try to get to know each other very well in a very short period of time, all while wrestling with secrets and how much they can let their guard down. Brian finds himself increasingly dazzled by Dominic as he penetrates the racer's inner circle, and he eventually throws away the entire reason he went undercover in the first place. Dom over here trusts Brian way too quickly despite some, honestly, pretty clear signs that he was a cop. This internal conflict about getting close to someone but being unsure of how much of yourself you can reveal to them, and having to deal with all the outside forces telling you not to be together, that's pretty familiar to those of us Britney fans in the audience. The psychological drama that drives this movie is what makes it kinda gay. You can't separate the two. The Fast and the Furious isn't alone among action movies that end up a little homoerotic. Have you seen Point Break? And why do you think that volleyball scene in Top Gun is so infamous? When the majority of emotional drama in a movie happens between men, and especially when those two men are constantly shown as being cool and tough and macho and fit and all that, it's not surprising that some people are going to see it as gay. That's kind of the beauty of art, that you can read it more than one way. One person will see a close platonic bond, someone else will see two people in love, and neither of them are wrong. That's how we engage with movies, by connecting them to our own experiences. So just because action flicks are aimed at straight men doesn't mean that they're the only ones who can relate to it. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video and want to let me know in the comments or share it with your friends and stuff like that, go ahead. If you didn't like this video, keep it to yourself.